Anthony Gregory is research analyst at the Independent Institute and received his bachelor's degree in American history from UC Berkeley. A rising star in the libertarian movement, Anthony's many articles have been published by LewRockwell.com, the Future of Freedom Foundation, Ludwig von Mises Institute, publications like the San Diego Tribune, Contra Costa Times, Antiwar.com, and many, many others. Anthony composes and plays music with his band, the Melatones, and it's a great honor that he also serves as a policy advisor to the Future of Freedom Foundation. The title of Anthony's talk is Empire, War, and the Greater Good. Please welcome Anthony Gregory.
Hello. Well, thank you, Bumper. This is a great honor, and I got to say the way that he pronounced Contra Costa offends me, and we really need to keep the hordes out of this country, or else they'll start renaming all of California in Spanish. But seriously, no, this is an amazing honor, and I didn't mention this last year, though I wanted to. I actually am back in my hometown. I was born just a few minutes from here in Fairfax County, and I spent the first few months of my life in Reston, so this is a treat in many ways. Now, we're used to hearing about political issues boiled down to a controversy or a conflict between the individual and the greater good. It seems that almost anyone's pet project for big government can be sold as a way to advance the public interest, the general welfare, and this is such an important goal that mere individuals and their interests have to be pushed to the side. Now, before relating this to war, it's important to reflect on what it means to take the individual's side on such questions. It doesn't mean that we're atomistic, that we're very narrowly selfish. It doesn't mean that we oppose social cooperation. We oppose groups coming together, people forming organizations of law, family, community, and so forth. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's just that we see the individual as the premier unit of civil society. We believe that voluntarism is that from which groups of any value are formed. So we defend the family and churches and communities and honest business, but to the extent the individual and the individual's liberty, rights, and dignity are respected, these groups flourish, and society as a whole, the greater good, actually benefit. And of course, to the extent that the individual is pushed to the side, they do not. Another point that I would raise is that selfishness can't be abolished by the public sector. Whether we see it as benign or benevolent or malicious, the state doesn't eliminate this aspect of humanity. All it does is it elevates some individuals to a position of privilege, to a position of unchecked lawless authority over other individuals. Now, thankfully, the premise of individualism has very strong roots in our culture, certainly in the United States and in the West. And now, in much of the world, there's a very strong individualist streak. Liberals and conservatives, left and right, there's a lot in common in this country. And I do like to occasionally reflect on the positives, because otherwise I think it's hard for us to have the energy to keep going forward against evil. But we see this on the left and right. I mean, when pro-lifers talk about abortion, they think about the dignity and the rights as they see it of the individual fetus. And whereas pro-choicers also see this as an issue of the personal liberty of the individual woman. And of course, these people disagree, and I'm sure there's some disagreement here, but the fact that this idea permeates both sides of the argument is significant. And on all sorts of issues, we hear the individualist ethic come up. You know, the left defends the individual sometimes, the right does. Now, of course, this is inconsistent because the same conservatives who talk about rugged individualism and respecting the rights of the person will attack the left as being too concerned with hedonistic selfishness. They see every call for social tolerance as a cover for, you know, individual decadence. And on the flip side, the left will defend the right to choose of an individual, but then they'll attack the right for covering up for greedy CEOs and caring only about their own checkbook. There might even be some truth to some of these complaints on a cultural level, but it's important to note the inconsistency here. And I think it's from this inconsistency that we have some of the problems that we do. But nevertheless, this individualism is very pervasive in the United States culture. And I think that in a very true sense, it was the American ethic of individualism that did help stave off communism, for example, taking root in this country. This was never this big of a threat. It wasn't because, Reagan and everyone before him built up all these nuclear weapons and that's what saved us. It's because something like communism would never actually take root in a culture that was as wedded to the individual. And of course, I'm talking total communism, not just welfare statism, which unfortunately is pretty much everywhere. Now, the thing about war is there seems to be a double standard. Some of the loudest critics of the collectivist mentality become total collectivists when it comes to the military, the national security state, the warfare state, war itself, bombing. And let's think of one of the great individualist champions of our time, someone who's a hero to many people in our movement and an inspiration to a lot of people, worldwide in the West, Ayn Rand. Now, Rand did some very important work in her time. There was a very collectivist zeitgeist that she battled against. But when it came to foreign policy, she didn't really apply this consistently. In her novella Anthem, which is my favorite work by her, actually, it's short for one thing, but you can read it in a couple hours. But it's a great book, and there's this dystopian world, and the first-person protagonist lives in a totally collectivist world where at one point she discovers the word I. She had been conditioned, along with all her culture, to only use the first-person pronoun we. By discovering I, she discovered the very concept of individualism. And this book's important in imparting the lesson that individualism is to a very large extent a cultural phenomenon. But how did she talk about foreign policy? Usually in terms of we. And she wasn't as, I'm going to address them in a second, but she wasn't as bad as many of her followers. She was a critic of the Vietnam War. But she criticized it from the standpoint of we. Why should we have to give our national treasure to benefit them? Them, those people who don't understand individualism. And this, there's something to this. It's better than saying that the U.S. should be constantly meddling everywhere. But there are limitations too. At her worst, she would say such things as, those savages, the Arab savages, stole our oil.